in resource-poor communities. So to conduct the scoping review, a framework by Oxy and O'Malley was followed, and this framework has 5 stages, which I'll briefly go through. So in stage 1, which is identifying the research questions, the population, concept, and context format was used to guide the development of the research questions. And the research questions were, what is the association between adult food choices and local retail food environment in resource-poor communities? And secondly, what characteristics of the local retail food environment facilitate or limit healthy food access? To identify relevant studies, keywords, and mesh terms, which you can see on the right-hand side, were used to search in 9 multidisciplinary electronic databases, and these are also on your screen. So the original search date restrictions were set between 2005 and January 2021, and the dated search was done to include studies that were published between February 2021 and March 2022. To select the studies, 2 independent reviewers screened the titles and the abstracts and read the full text articles using an eligibility criteria. So studies were included if they were empirical or theoretical, if the population was adults between 18 and 65 years of age, and if they looked at the food environment outside the home environment, but still within the retail food environment. Studies that looked at food access, food choices, and diet of adults in resource-poor communities were also included, and studies that were in English peer-reviewed journals and published between July 2005 and March 2022. To chart the data, we used a data collection form that was based on the framework by Oxy and O'Malley, and it recorded the study characteristics such as the title of the study, the aim, the study participants, the data collection method, the analysis, as well as the main findings. And lastly, in stage 5, which is collating, summarizing, and reporting the results, the identified studies were synthesized into 2 groups. Firstly, the studies on the association between food choices and the local retail food environment, and secondly, studies that reported the barriers and facilitators for healthy food access in resource-poor communities. In terms of the results, 2,426 studies were identified in the primary and the updated search. And after the screening, we were left with 47 studies that were published between 2006 and 2021 that we included. So of these 47 studies, most of them were cross-sectional in design, and most were conducted in urban settings. And approximately 70% of these studies were conducted in the United States of America, and we did not find any studies that were conducted in Asia or the African continent that were eligible. So of the 47 studies, 19 reported on the association between food choices and the retail food environment exposures, while 28 studies reported on the barriers and the facilitators for healthy food access. When looking at the retail food environment exposures that were studied in these articles, accessibility was the most frequently measured local retail food environment exposure, followed by availability or density of stores in the neighborhood, and then also in-store healthy food availability. The consumption of fruits and vegetables, as well as sugar-sweetened beverages and fast food, respectively, were the most frequently studied food choice or dietary outcome. So in terms of the association between food choices and retail food environment, certain food choice outcomes with healthy food retail environments were positive for healthy foods in 11 studies and unhealthy foods in 3 studies. And then certain food choice outcomes with unhealthy retail food environment exposures were positive for unhealthy foods in 1 study and negative for healthy foods in 3 studies. And then there were 9 studies that did not find any association between food choice outcomes and the retail food environment exposures. When looking at the barriers and facilitators for healthy food access in resource-poor communities, the main barrier was a high food cost, followed by the lack of public transportation. This includes public and private, and then limited geographic access also was a barrier, so living further away from a supermarket or a grocery store. In terms of the facilitators, the presence of healthy food stores such as supermarkets, large grocery stores, farmers markets were the main facilitators for healthy food access, followed by low food prices. So in conclusion, the present scoping review found confounding evidence on the relationship between adult food choices and the local retail food environment. High food costs, as well as lack of transportation, were identified as major barriers for healthy food access in resource-poor communities. Store types such as supermarkets, large grocery stores, and farmers markets, and low food prices were identified as facilitators for healthy food access. Since the majority of these studies were conducted in high-income countries, more research is needed on the local retail food environment in communities in low and middle income countries to develop better interventions to improve food choices and access to healthy foods in resource-poor communities. If you would like to know more about the scoping review, please go and read the published manuscripts. It's available online. Thank you all for listening.
Lala, for that very interesting presentation on the food choices and the retail food environment. In case of any questions, I encourage the participants to engage in the chat.